Meanwhile, in Gaza, as ceasefire negotiations between Israel and the Hamas terror group continue, aid for the sake of reconstruction is starting to flow into the Strip, and primarily aid money coming in from Qatar. However, in efforts to ensure that the money and aid materials actually make it to average Gazan citizens as opposed to the Hamas terror group, the United Nations has agreed to govern how the funds are dispersed. Further, Israel's reportedly seeking additional donations from European countries. In any case, here to discuss is CEO of the International Legal Forum, attorney Arsen Ostrovsky. Thank you so much for being with us. Now, how would you describe the situation in Gaza today?
Well, thank you for having me on, first of all. The situation in Gaza right now, I think there's a sense of calm that has taken place after the devastating conflict we had in May between Hamas and Israel. So the ceasefire is beginning to hold place, which is a positive thing. The question now becomes what next, and how do we ensure that this sense of stability and calm is long-term and is durable, and is one that also takes into account not just the needs of the people of Gaza, but also importantly the security needs for the state of Israel, given Hamas's ongoing control of the Gaza Strip and ongoing acts of terror, I would add as well, even after the ceasefire, albeit intermittent, as what we're seeing with the incendiary balloon attacks at the moment as well. But right now, all the attention is, as you suggested, looking at the reconstruction of Gaza, how the aid money will be flowing in and under what conditions.
So now let's talk about that aid itself. How far will the Qatari aid actually go? How much more is necessary to make a real difference in the Strip?
Look, that's a good question. How much money is needed? That's a very open-ended question. It is obviously quite a significant amount, given the state of Gaza and the conditions under which it is at the moment. That said, from Israel's perspective, it is certainly in Israel's interest for there to be calm in Gaza and for Gaza to be in a stable situation. The concern, however, becomes the money that does flow in, and as we've noted, a significant amount of that in the tens of millions from Qatar, is to ensure that that money actually gets to the people of Gaza and not to Hamas, where it can subsequently be used for acts of terror, for incitement, for rebuilding their arms and terror tunnels and so on. So from Israel's perspective, I think it is happy for aid to come in, and certainly to increase the pool of money so that Gaza is not reliant only on Qatar, but also on others in the international community, including in the EU, including through the United Nations. But for there to be two things. One, for there to be some kind of mechanisms in place to ensure that that money does go to the people of Gaza and not end up in the hands of Hamas and where it can be used for acts of terror, number one. And number two, Israel is looking to tie in any aid that does go in to be conditional in some respects on the retrieval of the Israelis that are being held captive by the Hamas, with two civilians and also the bodies of two soldiers as well. So for that to also form part of the equation.
All right, well, as you've hinted, the United Nations and EU have a bad track record, like Hamas funding, allowing money to go to pay for slay, UNRWA education materials, including hate and glorification of terror, weapons found in UN-affiliated offices and schools. So what safeguards are there or will there be to ensure that the aid goes to where it needs to go? How can we trust that the EU and the UN aid will be better conditioned than it was in the past?
Look, that's a great question, and I think those details are being worked out at the moment. There are certainly a lot of concerns at the moment. We've seen a lot of money that has come from the EU that has ultimately been used by the Palestinian Authority and others for payment of salaries of terrorists. We have seen various UN agencies, including UNRWA, taking the money that's purportedly supposed to be allocated for purposes of education and other welfare means that has ultimately ended up, again, in the hands of Hamas, for which they've used for whether it's replenishing the rocket arsenal or working on tunnels and or for other acts of terror. So that's a great question, and I would hope that is certainly a primary concern, as I'm sure it is, in terms of how to ensure that money ultimately goes to the people of Gaza and not end up in the hands of Hamas. There are a number of ways that can be done. There are a number of multilateral agencies that money can go, for example, to particular projects, which is important, and not to, for example, to the leadership of the Hamas or the PA, where we know that it can be used for other purposes. There can be observers, for example, monitoring in terms of how that money is divided and for what needs and purposes it is going to as well. So there's a number of different possibilities that can be put in place. But I think from Israel's perspective, it has taken a line where it has essentially said that it will not allow for any more blank checks coming in, whether it's from Qatar, from other places into Gaza, and that can ultimately be used by Hamas in the end for committing acts of terror against the state of Israel.
So how involved is Israel in creating these safeguards with these other donor countries and organizations?
Well, I mean, Israel's involved to a very intricate level. In the coming days, there will be a meeting of the Ad Hoc Liaison Committee, which is the group of the international community, specifically from the EU and other countries as well, whose primary focus is the issue of the reconstruction of Gaza. Israel is very much an active participant in that. And from what I understand also, that the Israeli government is in negotiations both with the EU and also with the UN and its different agencies to discuss how to get that money to for those purposes that it is needed for, and not funneled for use of terror, violence, and incitement. So Israel certainly has a strong interest in maintaining the calm. It wants Gaza to be obviously not just peace with the people of Gaza, but for Gaza to be economically stable and for the people there to have the opportunity to thrive. But that can only happen if the money goes towards them and not into the hands of Hamas.
All right, Arsen Ostrovsky, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.